Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee. My name is Philippe Cunningham, and I am the council member and the chair for this committee. With me at the dais are council members Schrader, Gordon, and Johnson. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum and can operate or conduct the business of this committee. On today's agenda, we have 3 consent items and 4 presentations or 4 discussions. First, on the consent, we have for item 1, authorizing an agreement with Optum Insight Inc. in the amount of $5,000 annually, not to exceed $25,000 overall, for the school-based clinic program. Number 2 is a lease agreement, authorizing a lease agreement with the Special School District Number 1, Minneapolis Public Schools, at no cost to the city for space and support for the city's school-based clinics program. And the third item is a contract with Cherie Moldenhauer for multi-jurisdictional task force on opioids consultation, and that's going to be to not exceed $50,000. And with those 3 items, I move approval. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and those items carry. So now we're going to move on to our discussion items. First up, we have receiving and filing the 2018 Appointed Boards and Commissions Diversity Survey Report. And looks like we have Ms. Cheyenne Brodin here, and the floor is yours.
Chair Cunningham, council members, my name is Cheyenne Brodin, and I am the Internal Services Manager with the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. And I am before you today presenting on the 2018 Appointed Boards and Commissions Diversity Survey Report. We have been conducting this survey of our appointed boards and commissions since 2009. The city benefits from the volunteers of about 300 residents who serve on the 20 appointed boards and commissions in the survey. These boards and commissions represent a key component of community engagement and community engagement activities in city actions and decision-making. Boards and commission members provide valuable insights, help shape key policy decisions, and provide community-based input into the design and administration of city services. This work is imperative to ensure that these volunteers are representative of the city of Minneapolis. Through the years, we have been tracking this work. We have become a model across the U.S. for the diversity on our boards and commissions and the way we track it. Director Rubador has had conversations with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity and the Project on Municipal Innovation through webinars, and has written blogs on the subject for both organizations. As well, we have been contacted by other cities around the U.S. who we've seen from their work have actually copied our diversity report and tracking. And the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department has been working with the City Clerk's Office and other city departments, as well as the City Council, on this work since 2009. We conduct the diversity survey through an online SurveyMonkey tool, and there are 20 boards and commissions included in the survey. A full listing of them is found on page 2 in the full report. Respondents' participation to the survey are neither compulsory nor random. As a result, the survey is not scientific. So any propensity for one demographic to respond over another is not weighted in the results. Therefore, we rely heavily on the response rate for the validity of the survey. Although the department has been conducting these surveys since 2009, only data from 2014 and beyond is included in the report. The 2009 and 2012 surveys were sent to a broader group that is actually outside of the scope of the survey. And the 2018 boards have actually changed slightly from 2016. There are some boards that were no longer active, so we removed them from the results, and then new boards have been created since 2016. So those have been included. Additionally, the city clerk's office began collecting voluntary demographic information from applicants in 2013. So in this survey report, we're including data from 4 appointment cycles from years 2017 and 2018. And the response rate for the applicant pool is 43%. And the margin of error for all questions is between 5 and 8% at a 99% confidence level. And lastly, to the diversity measures that we track through this report, which I'll reference quite frequently, are age, disability, education, gender, income, race and ethnicity, and renters. And while we track and report on sexual orientation, there's no city data to compare it to. Therefore, we're only reporting on the results for each year. In total, 285 board and commission members seated on the 20 boards and commissions listed in the survey were asked to take the survey, and the overall goal of the survey was to achieve a 70% response rate, and our results for this year are 69%. And I would really actually like to thank the boards and commission staff from other city departments. We rely heavily on them to get the survey out to their boards and commissions, and they've been very accommodating to the NCR department in getting on their agendas and sending out reminders and things like that. So without them, we couldn't have achieved the 69% that we have this year. For this presentation today, I will highlight the key findings of the survey, while the full survey report includes more details and information. There's been a steady increase in diversity in residents of color serving on city boards. We've met our race benchmark by being within 80% of the city's population. 33% of our board members are people of color, and the population of Minneapolis is 36% people of color. Our boards are becoming more inclusive with the creation of new boards such as the Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee and the Transgender Equity Council. There is now a more dedicated focus on racial and gender equity. Our boards need more diverse representation of educational backgrounds amongst our members. Currently, high school and technical school graduates are underrepresented in our boards and commissions, and we need to ensure that more renters are serving on our boards. While the city's overall population is about half renters, only 21% of renters serve on our boards and commissions. And additionally, we need more youth ages 18 to 24 serving on our boards. The age demographic as a whole, we are within the city's the benchmark that we track in this report. However, we're still dramatically low in that specific age category. And we have also seen a significant decrease in the number of individuals serving on multiple boards. And this is important because the more seats that are open allows more people to get involved and engaged with city government. The Neighborhood and Community Relations Department has a 5-year plan to create a system of equitable engagement that we call the Blueprint for Equitable Engagement. And one of the measures tracked through this online dashboard is the diversity of our appointed boards and commissions. This graph is from that plan that shows the year-to-year trends of each of the 7 diversity measures from years 2014, 2016, and 2018. As we continue to track our results over the years, we've seen a general shift in overall improvements of each of the measures. The diversity measure dashboard is used to set benchmarks on how the 7 diversity measures tracked in this report compare to the city population. It's intended for the readers of this report to quickly make comparisons to the results. To tabulate the benchmarks, we take the survey results divided by the data set, and for this year, it's the 2017 American Community Survey data. And additionally, for diversity measures age, education, and income. We use the Shannon Diversity Index to calculate the results, in which these diversity measures have a range of options within the category. And the Shannon Diversity Index is a statistical formula commonly used in population studies to weigh the relative diversity of a community. And this is the snapshot, the diversity dashboard from the 2018 survey results. As I said, we meet 7 out of the 5 benchmarks with age, disability, gender, income, and race, ethnicity. And education and renters is in the yellow category, which we've deemed needs attention. For the 2018 survey, we show a 4% increase in people of color serving on boards and commissions. This diversity measure is one that since 2014 has shown significant improvement from year to year. This graph shows the trend line of our survey results for 2014, 2016, and 2018 compared to the city's overall population. For the overall city data, an interesting point to note is that the city population for people of color actually decreased by 3% from 2014 to 2018. We've seen a significant decrease between 2016 and 18 survey results in the number of concurrent appointments. We measure the number of people who serve on multiple city boards and commissions in this survey because the less people who serve on more than one board or commission leaves opportunity for more people to serve in general. The 2018 survey results show additional results that we've seen in past years in the way respondents chose to identify their gender. The survey had an option for people to identify in any way that they choose, so we're reporting on results just as we've received them. We have also seen an increase in female representation on our boards and commissions, and this is the reason why our overall benchmark decreased from 98% in 2016 to 88% in 2018. Sexual orientation, as I stated before, we ask this question and report on it, but there is no city data to compare the results to, and we include this in the findings each year. Again, while the city's overall population is made up of 50% renters, our boards and commissions are only made up of 21% renters. This diversity measure has the most opportunity for improvement overall. As you can see, we track the results and report on the results of who's applying, who's in our applicant pool. And the data shows that about 40% of people who are applying are renters. So there's opportunity to get more renters actually seated. In education, the composition of our boards and commissions are made up of people who have higher formal education. And one of the things that we really need to work on is expanding that to people whose education comes from other ways with more diverse backgrounds and life experiences. And this diversity benchmark is at 59% of the city's population and needs attention.
Ms. Brodin, I'll actually jump in quick here.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why folks are able to engage with higher levels of education are able to engage is because I think a part of it is that meetings are just like a part of a professional's life. Like if you ask most professionals, like, what do you have? How many meetings do you have? They'll be like, oh, I have X amount. But if you ask most folks who are, working class or, on a hourly wage, that's not necessarily the same sort of like space of like where I'm going from meeting to meeting. So
Right.
one of the things that I'm curious about is the additional support that would be there. Has NCR, thought about that, and how is that incorporated? And as well as, right now it's really set up to be most accessible just by the way that it exists for folks who have higher education and more flexibility. So, what are your thoughts? What
Sure.
have NCR talked about with that?
Sure. Chair Cunningham, council members, thanks for asking the question. This is a part of a larger conversation that we've been having with the clerk's office. They own, in essence, the boards and commissions system. And Casey Carl is here today, and he might be able to delve a little deeper into some ideas and concepts that he's been having conversations about.
Welcome, Mr. Carl. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to be here. My name is Casey Carl. I have the pleasure of serving as city clerk. As Cheyenne mentioned, this is a policy level discussion that has been ongoing for several years and several terms now in front of council. The NCR department and clerk's office worked under previous Vice President Lilligren and previous Vice President Glidden on a series of process proposals, including several policy recommendations, which would include many of the things that you had mentioned. Those haven't progressed beyond a staff study at this point, and you may recall that at the beginning of this term, there were a number of ordinances that had been introduced and not completed in the prior term. One of those had to deal with boards and commissions that had been sponsored by the former Vice President Glidden and was reintroduced and is now being led and authored by our current Vice President, Andrea Jenkins, who I know is a member of this committee and couldn't be here today. So we have had some preliminary conversations to bring Vice President Jenkins up to speed on what had been going on in the previous term and getting her direction in terms of some proposals that will ultimately, I'm assuming, make its way forward to City Council.
Thank you so much. I have a question or comment from Councilmember Brodin.
It's just a comment. I just wanted to give some credit to NCR and the City Council for also forming the One Minneapolis Fund, because one of the things we actually did with that fund is we funded organizations that were willing to give people training and experience and the confidence necessary to step onto a board and commission. And I think that, at least anecdotally, I know we've had some success with that, and also not only kind of commending our own staff and the genius of our council for thinking of it, but also for those groups who applied for those funds and provided that training and support and were able to help us recruit folks to get on these boards and commissions, which I do think is one way to get at what you're talking about too.
I did have one more question about data, and I'll just go ahead and jump in here with it. But so we talk about people of color, but I was curious about, is there any sort of data collection around immigrant and refugees as well?
Chair Cunningham, council members, so we don't ask that question specifically in this survey as of yet. We are always looking at ways we can fine tune the way we ask questions. One of the things that we do is, overall, the way we're sharing the data today is a generalization of people of color. The survey report goes into more detail. We ask questions that allow people to further identify. So the way the census asks the question, it's the way we have our general questions structured is, are you African American? Are you American Indian? And so on. We have questions that allow respondents to further identify. So let's say you check the African American box. If you're of East African descent, you can then further identify that you're Somali, Ethiopian, what have you. So that is one way that we're getting more idea of who's actually serving on our boards and commissions. But I will definitely note that and how we can improve the survey for 2020.
Great, thank you. Just want to make sure we have representation. All right, I'm seeing no other questions. The floor is back to you.
All right. And one of the last slides here is the youth category. This is one where actually the age demographic is within 90% of the city's population. So overall, we meet this category. But from the survey results, we can see that we're dramatically low in representation of city residents ages 18 to 24 serving on our boards and commissions. Again, we do have some opportunity. Looking at the applicant pool, we see that that number is higher. So we are having people apply. So definitely more work needs to be done to get younger people serving on our boards.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Lastly, I just wanted to address some past staff directives that we've received from the 2016 survey. So one of the staff directives was to expand the One Minneapolis Fund to incorporate projects that seat people on neighborhood boards. And we've done that, and we've actually seen some good results in people getting seated on boards, neighborhood boards from our survey results. And while we have not yet come back with recommendations for a specific youth seat on the boards and commissions from the NCEC. We have last year created a City Academy for Youth program, which is intended to get youth more aware and interested in the opportunities on serving on boards and commissions and getting connected to local government in general. And with that, this concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Great, thank you. I have a question. Is the City Academy for Youth, is that still available? Because I know that was an Urban Scholar project, but is it possible to have those actually go out into the schools?
Definitely. Chair Cunningham, council members, definitely. Last year was the first year that we did the program, so we're definitely looking at ways to improve it and make it better. We also do a City Academy that's just for average citizens or residents to participate in, so we have multiple opportunities, but we do want to explore that with the schools.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to facilitate with Patrick Henry. So
Awesome.
I have a question or comment from Councilmember Brodin.
Yeah, I have a couple questions and comments, and maybe you could go back to the slide that shows the age differences, because I do want to just commend us. Seeing the applicant pool there from 2017 to 2018 and seeing how many people applied from the younger age groups, I think that's pretty significant, and appreciate that. It does point to an ongoing problem we have with getting younger folks seated. In case anybody missed it, I've been a proponent of trying to set aside more youth seats because I think that would be a way to kind of meet this. I think sometimes it's really hard for a young person with less experience and they're not so savvy to look good on their application and to make it through, and it's much easier if there was something set aside. We've always hit attention because then we wonder about, well, what are all the other seats we should set aside for other people? So I understand we're still dealing with that, and it's unfortunate we haven't got a recommendation coming forward at this point. But I did notice that for the green zones, and I don't think the green zones are part of the boards or commissions we've evaluated on this, but there are efforts coming forward, I think with both of the green zones, to set aside youth seats. So that's an example. Are there other boards or commissions you're aware of that have decided on their own to set aside a seat for youth?
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Gordon, not to my knowledge.
Okay. I also will note that we have the Youth Congress, which I know isn't also part of this boards or commissions, but that's a great avenue that we could pursue as we're talking about how can we recruit more youth and bring them in. I appreciate that. I did have one concern that I want to note. I noticed that on our disability, for example, score we rated really high, and 11% would mean we're successful, we're reflecting the city. We have a committee that's made up of people with disabilities. So I get concerned sometimes when I see this that we're going to skew our results based on the makeup of one advisory committee. So I want us to be able to look at that, and sometimes I think it might be useful to say, could we pull that out and see how we're doing? I also have a concern now that we have a racial equity advisory committee. We may actually identify some other committees that we think are kind of focused more and more likely to be more diverse or have different kinds of representation. I'll note while I'm doing that, we also have a group that's there to advise us on people who are older. So I suspect the people, and I forget the new name of our advisory group on aging, but maybe that's it. We probably have older people there, and so is that skewing our results to think we're doing better? So I'm not sure if we have a little thing we can hand to folks who are going through the process of making the appointments, as well as making recommendations about those appointments, but that we can look at, here's like an ideal makeup, here's what we should do. I know I participated in some of the review groups for applicants, and we talk about that and we look at that, and it is a topic. So it might be a time, as we're kind of codifying how we do that and how we look at that, we're just reminded to constantly be looking at some of these categories or whatever we've decided we want to have as the mix to look at that. I'm sure you haven't pieced out any of the groups and looked at the numbers like without, so if you have looked at how we rate without like the disability committee involved, you can share that with us, but I suspect we don't have that numbers.
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Gordon, to answer that specifically, I do know that the response rate for the disability question is about 5%. Is due to actually people serving on the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities. So the additional 6% is other board members. So while it definitely does add to, and enhance the results, I think it's a part of our board system being inclusive and calling that out and understanding that we as a city do have opportunities for people, or we're hearing directly from people who fit in that group. So.
Excellent. Well, that's great news. And I do know that I think it's a pedestrian advisory committee definitely has representation there, and others are probably seeking it out. The last question that I have for now has to do with not just people serving on multiple boards. I know we don't have any prohibition on that, but I was curious if there were any advisory boards or commissions that have term limits. Because one of the other things we've had concerns about is people who serve, and it's great to have experience and all of that. Do you know of any that have term limits?
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Gordon, I'm getting nods from the city clerk that yes, we do have boards that have term limits. I know that the Neighborhood Community Engagement Commission does, as an example, but there are some that do as well.
Do you think it would make sense to have any kind of uniform rules around that?
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Gordon, that would be an idea to propose and definitely something for staff to explore.
Okay. Well, I have no staff direction. You'll be relieved. No staff direction at this time about that, but that is some interesting topic. And I'll just note that I saw it in the recommendations or something that's pretty close to term limits having to do with the neighborhood boards, and I was curious about, well, should we try to be consistent on both of those? And because it gets complicated. Thank you very much for indulging me.
Great. And one last comment, and then we will move to receive and file. Thank you for all of your work on this. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, as well. As we are thinking about representation and voice in the city, I just want to name that we're striving for parity to reflect the city, but also to take into consideration that not only has it not been representational, but it's actually been marginalizing historically. And so thinking about actually equity, which is sometimes over-representation of various communities and demographics. And so just wanting to name, we should be aiming for beyond it. I'm not here like this is where we're going to stop, but just to name kind of where we are of how it is actually important for us to actually aim for over-representation so that we can have a more equitable balance throughout power So with that, seeing no further comments or questions, I move to receive and file the 2018 Appointed Boards and Commissions Diversity Survey Report. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item passes. Thank you so much. Next up, we have the 2018 Minneapolis Neighborhoods Board Diversity Survey Report, and this is going to be given by Mr. Araya Fine.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Cunningham and committee members, council members. My name is Araya Fine. I'm the neighborhood support specialist, a neighborhood support specialist at Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. And today I'm presenting the results for the 2018 Neighborhood Board Diversity Survey. And this is a receive and file item. Today I'll be discussing the outcomes of the 2018 survey as we're working towards, it's part of working towards our goal of becoming one Minneapolis, where disparities are eliminated so all Minneapolis residents can participate and prosper. So as you all know, we're a city with incredible diversity and have truly unique infrastructure in these neighborhood organizations across the city. They provide an opportunity for real thriving community engagement at a neighborhood level, and they have the potential for an equitable channel of communication and collaboration between the city residents and the city enterprise. And so what our goal is with this is to keep in mind with any initiative of this scale, 70 neighborhood organizations across the city, there's hundreds of volunteers serving on neighborhood boards and committees. There's both stories of success and areas for improvement at that neighborhood level. So what we're going to look at today is the following report is going to focus on a citywide level. So it's going to be a snapshot of all of the neighborhood boards, survey respondents at a citywide level for neighborhood organizations. And this is where we focus on neighborhood boards because this is where the leadership and decision-making body is for an organization. And that's where we're going to look at the current gaps in representation along 7 diversity benchmarks. And that's not to say that there's not many other ways that communities are engaging, but this is the way that we kind of look at representation. So. We'll start with what the survey is. This is a biannual survey of these neighborhood organizations, 70 neighborhoods. There's about 750 board members currently, even more seats available. And they represent the 400,000 residents of Minneapolis, right? So they are geographically based. There's, no matter where you live in Minneapolis, a neighborhood organization that should be representative of you, that you should be able to have a vote in who serves on that board to represent you. We do this survey because we believe in the diversity of neighborhood organizations is a fundamental equity issue, as board leadership is the decision-making body for a geographic area, and they are in charge of the allocation of that neighborhood's funding and priorities. So our process for ensuring that we do have, a real good response rate is that we go out to all 70 neighborhood organizations. We attend a board meeting, myself and the other neighborhood specialists, and then we follow up. They're able to complete it by hand, and then we follow up with an online survey for those who weren't able to make it to that. And that's what helped us get a really high response rate. I'm thankful to Cheyenne. The appointed boards and commissions follows a similar process, so I'm not going to go into detail about some of these, but the benchmarks that we use goes up to the goal of the 100% is perfectly equitable representation in terms of the city demographics and the survey respondents. And then we also use the Shannon Diversity Index for age, education, and income. It's also a voluntary survey, and it's not scientific in that way, but we try to make sure that we make it as accessible as possible so that we get a good turnout. These are the 7 diversity benchmarks that we use. Age, persons with disabilities, education, gender, income, people of color, and owners and renters. These are the ones that, again, these are because these are data that we can compare to a citywide demographic snapshot where we're using the American Community Survey's 2017 data. So just wanted to highlight the response rate. We have a 74% response rate. That was the same as we had in 2016. And again, 2016 is when we began to go out to every neighborhood, and that's what increased from 2014 to 2016, the response rate. We had 554 participants across the city. And so this is, a goal that we have is to make sure that this remains a accurate and really representational snapshot of the city overall. All right, so this is our dashboard. This is available on the NCR website. It's based off, it's part of the Blueprint for Equitable Engagement dashboard that we utilize, and it provides a quick overview of citywide level and year to year on the 7 benchmarks. I'll go into a little more detail on a few of them in a minute, but similar again to the appointed boards and commissions, we calculate the benchmarks out of a goal of 100%. So anything, as you can see in the gray area, anything above 80% is something that we would consider, on track. Those below and then below 40% are ones that we think need improvement. So I'll go into detail on a few of those in a minute. These are some of the key findings. So as I mentioned, 74% response rate. It was really a crucial part of the going out to, the going out to the neighborhoods of the way that we wanted to make sure that this really is reflective and that there, is a high response rate. 14 boards had 100% response rate. And sometimes it's just because a board member is not available, too busy, that kind of thing, that some don't. So demographic of the neighborhood boards has not shifted significantly since 2014. So as you looked at the dashboard previously, and then as we looked at the shift of representation on those boards, again, snapshot of the city overall hasn't had significant change in the last 4 years. Some of the areas to point out, the city demographics is 50% renters currently, and there's 17% renters on neighborhood boards. People of color, there's 36% in the city and 18% on neighborhood boards. And then the areas similar to the appointed boards and commissions, that the benchmark uses the Shannon Diversity Index. So that's a snapshot of all the different categories, but if you break them down individually, the youth ages 18 to 24 are significantly underrepresented, and those with income under $50,000 or education below a college degree are also underrepresented in terms of neighborhood boards. So this is our closer look at the renter-homeowner snapshot. There's 770 current board members, and so just to give a sense of that gap, it's a 33% gap in terms of representation of renters. That reflects approximately 300 less renters serving on boards than we'd like to see in terms of the city overall. Similar snapshot for race and ethnicity. You can see the trend from 2014, 16 to 18. And then that 18% gap in terms of representation currently is a reflexive of maybe about 150 less people of color serving on boards than we would like to have to be reflective of the city demographics.
Mr. Fine, we have a question or comment from Councilmember Brodin.
Just wanted to understand the graphic on here a little bit better. So why is the goal is 64%?
The blue is white. Identifying.
Right, and so that's the goal because that matches the citywide statistics.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So there'd be an overrepresentation on this side. So.
Yep.
Again, similar to the appointed boards and commissions, we track gender identity and sexual identity and try to provide in our survey a more inclusive way, which you can see reflected here. While the citywide census data available only provides a male-female binary, we felt it was important to provide a more inclusive approach and be able to track that. But with these two slides, you won't see it compared to a citywide demographic benchmark because that's not available through the ACS or census data. The last thing we want to show is just the length of service of survey participants. So as you can see here, a vast majority of board members, 66% approximately, have served on a neighborhood board for 3 years or less. And it's just important to point out that there is a bit of transition, and so there's plenty of opportunity for new folks to get involved in these institutions and be involved in their neighborhoods. And that's the bulk of the slides. It's important to note here that, again, the numbers I shared are citywide, but our day-to-day work, so the work that I do as a neighborhood specialist with the neighborhoods I work with, is on an individual neighborhood level. And so with those, they'll each have their own unique gaps, and our strategies for engagement will look different with each neighborhood. As an example, there's a need to have more renters on neighborhood boards. You see that in the snapshot, but the strategy for reaching out to and engaging renters is going to look different in the Camden and near North communities compared to maybe downtown or Powderhorn or uptown. Well, there haven't been significant changes in the citywide, significant shifts in the representation citywide results. There have been neighborhoods and communities that have seen some shifts, and those are the examples that are going to be reflective and valuable in thinking about the work that we do and how we're going to continue to serve. So just want to kind of emphasize our goal, Neighborhood and Community Relations would like to see more equitable representation at neighborhood boards throughout the city, and this requires a partnership and collaboration with the 70 neighborhoods. These are independent nonprofits, so we work alongside and with the staff and volunteers in these neighborhood organizations towards these goals. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Great, thank you. I have a question or comment from Councilmember Gordon.
I think I have a question and maybe a comment as well. So do the neighborhood boards get this feedback on this in terms of not only the citywide results, but also their own board?
Yeah, so this survey, we don't break down to the neighborhood level just for the privacy concerns that maybe individuals would have about making that data, available from us. What we do have for every single neighborhood is the MinCompass data, so we have the American Community Surveys data for each neighborhood. So we're able to sit down with a staff member or the board, as I've done even just this weekend with a board, and say, here's the demographics of your neighborhood. Here's what, representation would look like in terms of renters or, people of color, some of the other demographic bases. But we haven't broken this one down to individual neighborhood level.
And I know that people gather together and they're sitting around and they can look at one another. And I also know that it's voluntary for them to give the information to us.
Yeah.
And they're doing that knowing that it won't be shared broadly, but obviously there's a staff group that's looking at it.
Yeah.
So we should think about how we're going to help neighborhoods understand where their needs are and where they aren't, so that they also can have that information. Because you could easily see that if they didn't know it was 100% homeowners, they might be thinking some of us are renters for a long time. Now, the neighborhood boards I know talk to one another and they ask each other questions and usually answer pretty openly, but nevertheless, something to think about maybe as we're moving forward.
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Gordon, I definitely agree with you. And as we look at Neighborhoods 2020 and the sort of next iteration of how we work with neighborhoods, that'll definitely be a question that we'll want to be thinking about, is how to do that on a neighborhood level.
And maybe I just want to share an observation, because I've been on the council for a while, and this was just a very small idea the first year that we did it. And I want to give credit to the Civil Rights Department, the one department that I could get excited about it at the beginning, to say we should maybe do an audit of our boards and commissions, and then the coordinator's office came on board. I think we maybe started before NCR, even the first time you were there. You helped us? Okay, good. I know that I went around to boards and commissions with the surveys with some staff too, to try to get people to fill it out. So it was a teeny idea and nobody was sure if it would amount to anything. And so my colleagues, look what can happen if you have an idea and you get some buy-in. Now you come back years later and what was Cheyenne saying about this? Like, people are looking at us thinking we're doing this really well or whatever. So it's great to see that we're using it. It's nicer to see that it's made a difference with some of our boards and commissions, and hopefully it will keep making a difference as we keep working on it. So thank you.
Could you go back to slide 10, please? So I wanted to get some clarification. So I know that diversifying boards, neighborhood boards for the various neighborhood associations has been a priority. That's something that folks have been talking a lot about. What support does NCR provide to neighborhood organizations to be able to actually bring more folks of color into the organization?
Chair Cunningham, council members, that's an excellent question. I believe 2 years ago we came forward with some recommendations as well, and some of the things that we have put in place. In the last 2 years, we've instituted learning labs. So we have our community specialists who work with different cultural communities, East African, Southeast Asian, African American, American Indian, and Latino communities, provide learning labs, so series of workshops during the day and in the evenings, and we've done that for about 2 years as an opportunity and in a direct response to neighborhood organizations asking for support in engaging particular demographics and communities. In my role as a neighborhood specialist, a primary way that I can be of support to neighborhoods is to talk through this and sit down with them and talk about ways that they can better engage different communities. One follow-up, and this is again from the 2016 survey results, is that the current iteration of funding for neighborhood organizations is the Community Participation Program. And so the 2017 to 2019 cycle that they're in right now, on the application that we had them fill out in the fall of 2016, part of it was asking how they were going to engage underrepresented communities, and particularly asking them to reflect on what was mentioned earlier, their demographic data for their neighborhood, and how they were going to make sure that they were reaching groups that they hadn't previously reached. And we then were charged, the neighborhood specialist, along with our community specialist, went out and met with each of the neighborhoods to talk through sort of a plan going forward. Those are some of the steps we've taken. I know there's a lot more that we can do. And again, that would be what I would say. This is the goal of this, is to really inform what the next iteration of this would look like in Neighborhoods 2020.
Great. So how long have the Learning Labs been happening?
I believe fall of 2017. So I think there's been 3, and we're starting again March 20th.
So I know that the One Minneapolis Fund also, I know it focuses on boards and commissions, but it also focuses on neighborhood associations. So we've seen it have we're sort of making a correlation that there's some pathways there. Why do you think we haven't seen that reflected in the neighborhood associations?
Councilmember, Chair Cunningham, council members, it is a good question. I think one of the things that the difficulty of a snapshot of this is that it's 554 individual entries and 70 different neighborhood organizations. So I think there are places where that success has actually, can be realized either on an individual neighborhood that I've maybe seen just through the work that I'm doing, or we will eventually break this down on a planning district area, so that provides a little bit smaller, a little bit more nuance of a snapshot. So you can see areas where there is growth in terms of, say, renter engagement or people of color, and then other areas where, for one reason or another might have actually dropped. So there is movement within, within the city in different neighborhoods. That might not be reflective of the slide. As far as the One Minneapolis influencing neighborhoods, I don't have, Cheyenne might be able to share some data on how many we know from the surveys, but it's a big enough, it's a larger pool of survey respondents in this, and I think that might be part of the nuance. So.
Got it. All right. Are there any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Fine, for that presentation and those answers.
Thank you.
With that, I move to receive and file the 2018 Minneapolis Neighborhoods Board Diversity Survey Report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item passes. The next presentation that we have is receiving and filing a report relating to the Minneapolis Workplace Advisory Committee's research and policy recommendations to address wage theft in Minneapolis. And I will turn the floor over to our committee leaders.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Committee Chair Cunningham and council members. We were here last June and told you we'd be back, and so here we are. We really appreciate you taking the time to hear from us today and for supporting the important work of this committee. So, collectively, we have spent a lot of time on the wage theft issue over the last year and a half and 2 years, and it actually even has been underlying every single conversation we've had around earned sick and safe time and minimum wage as well. So we have, and I appreciated this boards and commissions presentation because we see a lot of diversity reflected in our own board with the Workplace Advisory Committee. And we have a very engaged committee with a lot of collaboration and a lot of diversity of viewpoints. And I do want to take the time for you to actually see the diversity of the people who are participating. So myself, Jim Rauter from Target, Molly Glasgow is a small business conglomerate, Veronica from the Worker Center, Chris Connery with Take Action, Brian Elliott at SEIU, Kate Davenport, a small business owner with Eureka Recycling, May Brooks from the Park and Rec Board, Ben Schweigert, who works with the Hennepin County Courts. What's your attorney's office? Wintana Milliken, another small business owner, Natalie Martin, small business, Tristan Jimerson, Taco Cat Restaurant, small business, Wade Luneberg, hospitality, industry, and labor, Ginger Jensen from $15, and Rebecca Lucero, formerly of the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. And we just want to make sure you understand the depth of the credentials of this committee and the work that we're bringing to you. And great representation, both from workers who are experiencing it directly, all the way up to lawyers who can help us figure out the nuances of some of these policy issues. So great diversity, great collaboration, and a lot of excitement. And just one thing is, like, this isn't a new body of work. Like I had already said, it is kind of completing the work that we need to do around minimum wage and earned sick and safe time. So we are not proposing a new right that needs to be protected. We're looking for, what we're talking about today is enforcing the work that we've done to date. So thank you so much for your time, committee chair and council member, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues of the committee who've been really doing the bulk of the in the weeds work to present. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Veronica Mendez-Moore, co-director of CETUL. And so I wanted to just take a quick second to talk about what wage theft is. There's a million different ways that wage theft happens, but I wanted to get a sense of like the scope and the nature of it. So you see here, there are issues of unlawful deductions where, you know, employers are just removing hours or removing pay from people's checks. There's not, you know, there's overtime and not getting paid, working more hours than people are getting paid for. The list goes on and on. This is just a sampling of some of the issues. I also wanted to particularly highlight misclassification of workers being classified as independent contractors that really should be workers, and it's there's not a lot of, whether in the city or a state level, there's just not a ton of work happening to actually like to pull that apart to be able to show where workers are actually workers and should be getting those rights. Also, is wage theft common? It is absolutely extremely common. A couple of examples locally, we did a survey and about half the respondents responded that they had experienced wage theft. There's really a seminal study that the National Employment Law Project did in 2009 that showed that of the low-wage workers in 4 major cities that they interviewed, 66% of workers had experienced wage theft in the previous week. So this is a constant, it's a rampant thing. You know, we've also seeing 100% of workers, so every single person is paying higher payroll taxes because of the fraud that happens when workers aren't paid. So it's impacting everybody. It makes it difficult for especially small businesses to actually operate on a level playing field when they're trying to do the right thing and other employers are not. So that's big picture. This is a member of CETUL, Cecilia Guzman. She experienced wage theft. She took the case to conciliation court, and even though she won in conciliation court, was never able to collect that judgment. That was 3 years ago, and she hasn't been paid. So this is, you know, an example of where a space that exists that's supposed to help resolve this problem just is insufficient, and we need to do more. Emilio Miranda Rios, these are 3 different examples of the wage theft that he's experienced over the last few years that he had concerns about and came to us with in janitorial, in the hotel industry, and working at a convenience store with just such an absurd reasoning of like, oh, well, those Sundays when you were working, that was volunteer time, so we're not going to pay you for that. And there's not even an attempt to like actually veil what some employers are doing. It's just really quite naked. So that's another example. Gonzalo Monge, a construction worker, who's often actually been misclassified, experienced misclassification. Over the last 8 years, he's had at least 1 major instance of wage theft a year, and that's not including other smaller instances where he essentially, and this is extremely common in this industry, where he just has to budget for like assuming he's not going to get all of his pay every year. He estimates that he assumes 25% of his pay is not going to come in and that those wages will be stolen. He's also taken some employers to conciliation court and won and never seen a dime. And this is Marfa, who's a member of CETUL, and I'll let Marfa tell a little bit about why she's here.
Good afternoon, I'm Marfa, and I'm a victim of wage theft. I was working with this subcontractor, lady cleaning building in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and she have me and another person working. She didn't pay us. After she promised that she was going to pay us, she take us to the. I came to CETUL, and we tried to recover the wages by going to the court. and still didn't recover the wages. So it had a big impact on me because at that time I worked for her like 3 weeks. I couldn't provide for my family. I couldn't pay my rent. I actually go homeless because of that. So with this task force coming in, I'm very happy about something is going to happen so that we could recover back some of what we have lost. Thanks.
Finally, just wanted to name Kevin Osborne, who works in the restaurant industry, where he is named that wage theft is the norm, that is regular. There are many different ways where workers are getting hours shaved off their checks, or just myriad problems in that industry in ways that employers are not paying workers. So obviously, these are a few examples. And, there are just over the last decade that SITUL has existed, there's just thousands of workers that have come to us experiencing these problems and that are excited to have finally this opportunity to do something to make a bigger change and are excited to come and, provide testimony as we continue to move this forward. Thanks. Jim?
Good afternoon. So in addition to learning from Minneapolis residents affected by wage theft, the WAC also undertook an examination of wage theft ordinances in other cities. For example, Philadelphia, Seattle, and Washington, D.C., which you see on this chart, have undergone similar journeys to flesh out what a wage theft ordinance should include. Through that research, we identified 6 main themes. First, providing a clear definition of wage theft. Seattle and D.C. defined wage within the bill itself, while Philadelphia was able to refer to some language that was connected with other state wage-related legislation. But a clear definition of wage likely includes different types of wages, such as daily, hourly, piece rate, and also including how bonuses play into the calculation. Second, all the legislation that we looked at included some sort of written notification of a person's wage. This written notification ensures the availability of some clear and precise documentation if a claim of wage theft arises. Much like we've seen in other Minneapolis workplace legislation, the Public Enforcement Authority would grant the city the power to investigate and enforce, likely through the Department of Civil Rights. Escalating penalties were also in all 3 ordinances. Typically, the first occurrence the penalty is minimal and focuses on education, but obviously as the same business has repeated offenses, you have escalation of penalties to drive home the solution. Fifth, the issue of joint employer liability. Philadelphia and D.C. Both directly address that issue, where both a subcontractor and a general contractor, or a staffing firm and a client company, are both held jointly liable for violations when they occur. And then finally, all 3 of the ordinances on this chart include a private right of action. This could be seen as not only a way of allowing claimants to sue a company directly, which already exists under contract laws, but also a way for the enforcement authority, even of the Civil Rights Department, to refer cases back out if they so choose as well. So based on all of this research that the committee has been involved in, to kind of tie this up, we would recommend that the city consider including the following in a proposed Minneapolis wage theft ordinance. 1, defining a wage in a way that clearly lays out wages that are above a minimum wage, overtime, et cetera, are able to be recouped. This addresses the current gap that does not allow for a full recoupment of wage if that wage is more than the current state minimum wage or city. Establishing a place and a process to collect wage theft complaints through a public enforcement authority. Requiring businesses to provide written notification of wage rate, payment schedule, overtime rules, et cetera. Since most businesses already have written notification, hopefully this will not be considered overly burdensome. An increasing penalty system that helps encourage education on the front end in the early stages while escalating as repeat offenses and multiple issues arise with a particular business. While not a part of our previous page, one of the concepts we'd certainly like to see fleshed out involves what is known as a rebuttable presumption, or putting the burden on an employer rather than the employee to prove that certain actions after a wage theft claim is filed is potentially retaliatory. And I think that's worth some discussion and investigation. And then the last point is, as with other discussions as we have brought forth to the City Council, we believe that the vast majority of businesses strive to understand and be in full compliance with all the legislation, but some smaller businesses especially have difficulty keeping up with the changing landscape. So to this end, we do think it is important to not only put money into enforcement, but equally into proactive education. I think now we're all available for questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I have a question or comment from Councilmember Gordon.
Well, fantastic. This is pretty exciting. I have a couple questions. First question I have is if you've heard about tipping or forced tipping, encouraged tipping, tipping requirements as an example of wage theft at all?
Yes, absolutely. That was one of the things named by the worker on the slide, although he was a cook. But it is something that in our outreach we have heard from a lot of workers where either they're forced to pool tips, which is already illegal, excuse me, and also where tips are put on credit cards, that there has been wage theft from their employers as a significant issue.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's something I've been looking at too. I'm working on an ordinance to help protect workers who are involved in adult entertainment, and there seems to be, and they're categorized as independent contractors, which maybe that's what they want, but there still is a lot going on there to kind of uncover. My second question is, have you gotten any response to these ideas from city staff at all in the city attorney's office? And if so, what is their reaction? Or would maybe somebody wants to offer some thoughts now?
Well, we've been, yeah, sure. So we've been, we've been working with the Civil Rights Department, and we're all aligned on this. We're all feeling good about it. Both the folks that are on the committee and the city staff that we've been working with. We also worked with, have been working closely with Councilmember Palmisano and her staff, as well as Councilmember Fletcher and his staff there's excitement. There's excitement about
And I think Council
the
members
details.
Fletcher and Palmisano have been engaged in some direct conversation with the city attorney's office, and I think they've helped us understand some of the feedback there.
Did they already dibs this for subject introduction, or is it still open? It's been dibsed?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a technical, legal council rule term. Well, that's exciting, and hopefully they'll do it at our next council meeting, or whoever has claimed it. That's wonderful. I appreciate all the work that you put into this, and I'm glad to see this coming forward. And maybe one of us can still dibs fair scheduling when you show up with a recommendation on that one.
Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you. I think that brings up an important point. I'm really excited about this. I want to thank the committee for all the work, because I think it's worth saying that this makes the city more fair, that to a lot of us, this injustice was unseen, and to folks that aren't affected, it's sad that it's 2018 that we have to make this change. But that said, I don't want to take away from the excitement of all the work that you've done. I do want to highlight the enforcement. I think that's a big part. It's one thing to have the laws on the books. It's another if we can enforce them. The two things to pull out from that on the rebuttal, the presumption of rebuttal, I'd be very much in favor of that, because I think having the enforcement and then have the burden of proof be on someone not in a position to do that, such as a worker, to be able to prove that, I think might make these laws not have the outcomes we want. And then secondly, I'm excited to see the private action in there. I have a lot of faith in our city attorneys, but that said, if we start to see so many of these that we need a release valve, I think that provides that.
Great.
And we had one more.
Councilmember Palmisano.
If I may, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, because the question was asked, I can answer that Councilmember Fletcher and I are looking to formally introduce something in the May timeframe, and we are so grateful to have the Workplace Advisory Committee as well as the help of our presenters and starting to have these conversations in public. To put it in context, I wasn't here for the very beginning, but there is a House bill about wage theft. Representative Mahoney, I believe, is bringing it forward, and this is on Speaker Hortman's first top 10 priorities. So it will be interesting to see how far they get in these next couple of months and see how the city might most appropriately plug into this work. So thanks.
And I'm curious, just for the record, what stakeholders have been engaged and who has been at the table? There was, city staff, but could you elaborate a little bit more for the record? Who's been at the table? Because one of the things I've really appreciated is the vast amount of stakeholder engagement.
So when you go back to the list, thank you for the question. When you go back to the list, this has been a very active committee. And one of the charges that we think is the most important, and one of the things that culture that we provide is like each of these people aren't just here representing their constituency. They're being charged with going back into their networks, back into their communities to compile the information. So that's been happening in each of these different areas. So our small business leaders have been convening conversations in their small business communities about it. Workers have obviously been driving and pushing this from the very beginning, so they have a seat at the table. When I've gone back to our labor unions, we talk to, it's my job to make sure that we're talking to everybody in the labor movement and they're being engaged in the process. And then the same with the business community as well, the large business community as well.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? All right, seeing none, thank you so much to the committee. Thank you to city staff for all of your work. Thank you for the folks who have taken the time. This has been a lot of work, a long time coming, so thank you so much for everything. And on that, I will move to approve the receive and file of the report of the Minneapolis Workplace Advisory Committee's research and policy recommendations to address wage theft in Minneapolis. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Thank you again. Next up, we have our final presentation, which is the 2018 Labor Standards Enforcement Division Annual Report on both sick and safe time and minimum wage ordinance enforcement. And from here, we will turn the floor over. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Chair Cunningham, members of the committee, my name is Brian Walsh. I'm the manager of the Labor Standards Enforcement Division of the Department of Civil Rights. And I'm here today to give you an annual report on enforcement and implementation of labor standards for the year 2018. Just a quick overview and background will start off my presentation today to provide a little bit of the context for the enforcement and outreach data that then follows. The Labor Standards Enforcement Division enforces two ordinances, the Sick and Safe Time Ordinance and the Minneapolis Minimum Wage. By ordinance, the division is directed to come before City Council yearly and provide data on that year's nature, types, number, and outcomes of the investigations that we've been undergoing for the last year. So that's what I'm doing here today. You'll recall the effective dates of the Sick and Safe Time and minimum wage ordinances were mid-2017 and then the very beginning of 2018, respectively, but it wasn't until July 1st of 2018 that the minimum wage applied to every business in the city of Minneapolis. And at that same time, that ended the first year of enforcement of the Sick and Safe Time Ordinance, which really moved into a different stage of enforcement. You might recall that the ordinance directed us to focus on warnings and education during that first year. So July 1st of 2018, really just half of this reporting year, that things kind of picked up to another stage. This slide shows you on the left just some of the key requirements, the substantive legal requirements of these labor standards ordinances that paid, in most cases, paid sick leave or unpaid if an employer is fewer than 6 employees, must be provided at a rate of 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, may be capped at 48 hours yearly, 80 hours overall. On the right of this slide, you see the dates and rates of the Minneapolis minimum wage. A lot of what the Labor Standards Division has been doing on a day-to-day basis over really the last 2+ years is creating the tools and the information and all of the rules to actually give implementation life and give fill in all of the details that both employers and employees need to make these in the sick and safe time ordinance, especially to make this new employee right actually real. A lot of our time then is also spent on getting that information into the hands of the people who need it. One major or main way that we do that is on a daily basis, we're providing direct one-on-one consultations, mostly with employers, but also with employees, phone, email, in-person meetings, providing the specific information that is applicable to their specific workplace and working through the different logistical problems that inevitably arise. So you'll see in 2018 there were over almost 750 direct consultations. Another way that we get the word out is through a more broader approach of public awareness building, outreach presentations or other media opportunities. You'll see on this slide both a geographic map of where we were in 2018 and then the counts and the timing of where we were doing different things, but it's 65 different outreach opportunities or presentations or media events that are depicted on this slide. The best way that I know how to measure the impact of all of the outreach work and just the public awareness building, all of our, or a lot of the information lives on our websites. So I pay close attention to traffic coming into our websites, and I'm constantly referring people who have questions to the website to look up information, or give them the answer and say, when you need more, or if you forget this, go to this website. And you'll see on this slide that there were over 100,000 page views combined between the minimum wage and sick and safe time websites during the year 2018. Now we're moving into describing some of the enforcement data. There were 139 complaints filed during the year 2018, up significantly from 2017, which makes perfect sense because, of course, the sick and safe time ordinance came into effect only midway through 2017. You'll see the bottom half of this slide illustrates the types of complaints that we're receiving, and all of the bars in blue are different types of sick and safe time complaints, and minimum wage is in the green. The vast majority of complaints that we receive are regarding sick and safe time, not minimum wage. And the most common complaint, around 40% of the time, it's the complaint is essentially there's not a poster up, we're not having it accrued, we don't have access to it at all. So that's occurring in about 40% of the overall 40% of the complaints that comes through the office. This next slide illustrates the industries from which we are receiving complaints. The number that jumps out immediately is the 42% coming from the restaurant industry. I think that's not a surprise to anyone, but it really helps us think about how to proactively focus both the enforcement and outreach efforts in the future. We closed 172 investigations in the year 2018. The bottom half of the slide shows that over half of them were meritorious, and we were able to successfully resolve them through settlement with the employer.
All right, we're going to, if I may pause you, Mr. Walsh, we have a
Yes.
question or comment from Councilmember Brodin.
Just
The clarification, so the green is still minimum wage and the blue is still safe and sick time?
I'm sorry, say it again?
So what's the color coding represent? Is that minimum wage versus safe and sick time?
Yeah, the sick and safe is green, and minimum wage is blue.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I think you flipped the colors on me, but that's okay.
Yeah, so again,
Makes sense. Then it matches up better to the number.
yeah, and again, vast majority of what we're doing is sick and safe related, and I'd say that that's also true in the consultations and the questions that we receive every day, and I think that that's because of the fact that sick and safe did not previously exist, and there's a lot of new technical concepts that people are still wrapping their heads around. Though all of those enforcement efforts then resulted here ultimately in this last slide on the left half of the slide, we were able to collect almost $40,000 in both making employees whole and providing some compensatory damages for the fact that they didn't receive either the minimum wage or the sick and safe time at the time that they should have received it. So there's oftentimes some cost to the worker that they might be getting the sick and safe time now, but they really needed that pay, or they needed to be paid on a timely basis. And then the orange shows some of the penalties then that we try to use as a deterrent for a deterrent of bad actors repeating violations in the future. Even more important, I think, is the right half of the slide that shows the over 5,000 workers that needed our help in enforcing their rights and would not have received either sick and safe time or the minimum wage, but for the investigations that we and the investigations and violations that we found in 2018. Looking forward to some things for 2019. I think you heard from the Board and Commission, the Workplace Advisory Committee, the Civil Rights Department works really hard staffing that committee. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff and work that goes on there, and we're excited to see where you all and the committee, Workplace Advisory Committee, take that wage theft work in 2019. We do have a collaborative enforcement contract now with SATOOL for 2019, and that is really exciting work because SATOOL operates a worker center, has essentially a legal clinic, and does so much proactive work, proactive outreach in high violation industries. It really helps the Labor Standards Division and the Civil Rights Department move from just being a complaint-based reactive, first in, first out sort of processing complaints, to really getting and trying to look at holistically where are the problems in the community, where are the industries that have the highest rates of violations, and what can we do about that on a proactive basis. The last point I'll make before I wrap up, and I'm happy to answer questions, is we now have in the Labor Standards Enforcement Division the ability to communicate with employees by text. And I've found that low-wage workers especially aren't as necessarily in all cases as comfortable with email or with coming in to City Hall to sit down with me face-to-face. But certainly social media and text is something that has really, I'm excited for 2019 that it may remove that barrier, and we now have a way to communicate, and we're starting to publicize that ability to receive complaints and to communicate with employees and receive evidence from them just through texting. So in conclusion, the bottom line of our enforcement from the last year are the dollars collected and the workers directly impacted, and I'm glad to stand for any questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Excuse me. Do any of my colleagues have any questions or comments? All right. Well, I was curious, just for the record, if you could explain, you talked a little bit about texting as a way to file a complaint. What are the other ways for folks to be able to make complaints?
One, they can call 311, and we've worked really hard with 311 staff to train their operators to understand how our online complaint filing system works. There's just an online form, and the 311 operators are actually trained to help callers either fill in the information on the online form themselves, or the 311 operator can actually do that for them. Or folks can literally call myself or my staff directly, and we can help them fill out that form. The online form then kicks off the official process. Of course, they can also, at any time, are welcome to come in to the Civil Rights Department during regular business hours, and we can sit down and help them fill out the online complaint form as well.
So what I'm hearing is primarily the intake process is through an online form.
Correct.
And is that online form translated as well?
It is translated. It uses Google Translate, which we work over time to improve. Not all languages are going to be at the same quality of translation, but certainly we focus on the most common languages that we find amongst workers in Minneapolis: Spanish, Somali, Hmong, etc.
Great. Great. With that, any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for that. I move to receive and file a report on the Labor Standards Enforcement Division's 2018 work, including sick and safe time and minimum wage statistics that cover the nature of violations, specific violations, industries and occupations with high rates of violations, and the penalties assessed. With that motion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item is received and filed. Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Just to remind everyone, if you're interested in what your council member is doing, check out LIMS, lims.minneapolismn.gov, and call your council member to make sure that they know what you think. Thank you so much, and this meeting is adjourned.